we would actually say this is a philosophical formulation or a kind of a pre-formulation of the second law of thermodynamics. That things are going from a more ordered state to a less ordered state. It is not just the case that matter is in potency to form, because any kind of matter can become something else in some sense, but that even when matter is under form, it has a tendency towards disorder. Now, any of you who are of any age whatsoever know that to be the case. The older you get, the more disorder seems to appear in your body, and you didn't even do anything about it. Okay. So it has a tendency towards disorder, dissolution, or corruption as a result of the contraries existing in the matter. In other words, the various chemicals in their relationships will end up breaking each other down to some degree at some point, such that given time, the matter will become indisposed to the form itself. That's the aging process, for example, in us. And so as a result, eventually it gets to the point where the matter becomes so indisposed to maintain that form that there's a separation of the form, and in the case of life, that is what we call death. It gets to the point where your body can't sustain the operations of the soul, and so there's a separation of the body and the soul. And so in this, he says, we see this in everything from rocks to man, and so essentially this is the second law of thermodynamics. But the second law of thermodynamics precludes evolution, since evolution is precisely the opposite of that. Evolution is going from a less to a more organized state, which is contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, which indicates that material things are going from a more to a less organized state. Things are decaying. Things aren't as robust as they used to be. Some propose that the sun adds the energy that is necessary to counteract the second law of thermodynamics, and therefore evolution could occur here on Earth. But saying that the sun adds what is necessary to overcome any difficulties in the second law of thermodynamics does not suffice, given the problems in the relationship to the principle of sufficient reason, which I talk about in my book on the metaphysics of evolution. Because in the book on the metaphysics of evolution, I talk about then in the principle of sufficient reason, all of the secondary causes that are less than life do not of themselves, even when put together, do not have sufficient, to use a technical philosophical term, do not have sufficient act to be able to cause something that's alive. And so those in and of themselves, or even a higher state. And so it's analogous to, if it's analogous to basically if you don't have eyes, and if nobody here has eyes, we're not going to be able to beget something that has eyes. It's pretty much that simple. This discussion of matter's corruptibility, which is a limited formulation in the second law of thermodynamics, would therefore apply even to other planets. It's not just here, it's in the rest of the universe. Keep this in mind, because that is going to be one of the things, as we go through the criticisms of evolution in this world, that is on the Earth, these same principles apply there, whether they're metaphysical principles, theological principles, or whether they're scientific laws or principles are going to apply there as well. And so if evolution could not happen here, then it did not happen on any other planet. And so this means that even on other planets, things are tending towards disorder, not order. This has been observed in our solar system, as well as in relationship to stars throughout the universe following a specific life cycle. Exoplanets in the process of having their atmosphere stripped, or certain things of that sort. The physical laws and the second law of thermodynamics, as well as what St. Thomas says on the nature of corruption of material things, applies universally. That is, in the whole material universe. Then we apply this to life. Hugh did a masterful job in describing genetic entropy. I've never believed in evolution my entire life, and there was a reason for that. And it goes back to the formation issue, which Hugh and we've been talking about. When I grew up, we had to memorize the entire Baltimore Catechism in order to be confirmed. And it was a job, right? I mean, especially when you're in 6th grade, because I got confirmed in 6th grade. It's a job in 6th grade to memorize all these terms you don't even know what they actually mean. But in the Baltimore Catechism is the fact that there was a creation in 6 days. And when I memorized that, it just made so much sense to me when I read it. The first time I heard about evolution was in 8th grade, and when I first heard about it, it literally came off as a fairy tale. I'm like, who made this up? This didn't make any sense. I'm only in 8th grade, right? And so this is a very important point to keep in mind, that it's the formation we're giving people that's going to impact their ability to judge the validity of evolution. Human beings on a psychological level, as they're being formed, develop intellectual habits. And those habits actually affect their judgments and their reasoning process. So that when you introduce something that's dissonant to those habits, they're going to be able to judge it as false or wrong. Now, they may not know exactly why that's the case, but they will at least know this is not right. And so this is why the formation, especially when kids are young, to get that formation so that they actually understand it. And now, because of the fact that they're going to be bombarded with all the evolutionary hypotheses, not just even if they're homeschooled, they're going to see this stuff all over the place. They have to have a more precise intellectual grasp so that their judgments of these things can be even precise. When they see the errors, they know precisely why they're wrong. So in genetic entropy is a case of the principle that matter has a tendency towards corruption due to contraries. We would say this is the mutations caused by the contrary chemical reaction. So over the course of time, the mutations are cumulative from generation to generation, so that we're actually less genetically robust. This is actually why I actually gave a conference once, and the blowback that we got from it was quite significant, because I was basically saying, the basic topic was modern man's superiority complex, very similar to the conference that was given earlier. We have this idea because we come later, we know what's going on. People say, oh, well, I can press this button and I got this computer. Yeah, you don't even know half of what goes into how a computer even works. So don't tell me you're more smart than your ancestors. But the point being is that we are actually less intelligent than our ancestors. That's one of the things that the genetic entropy is causing intellectual decline. And if you want any proof of that, just go watch the mainstream news media for 5 minutes. Okay. But this is an important point, because the genetic entropy would not apply just here. If there were aliens on other planets, life on other planets, they too would be suffering the genetic entropy. So that in point in fact, if, let's just say, under the hypothesis that life was actually able to begin on some other planet, the fact of the matter is it would decay eventually and die out, especially if there's the billions of years in which they're talking about. So on a scientific level, this is those are the two things I just want you to keep in mind on a scientific level. Look at, as soon as we discovered genetic entropy, as they say, the fat lady sung. Hopefully there's no fat ladies in here, but the fat lady sung. Because the fact is, that was the death knell to any idea of evolution, genetically speaking. And so the question I've always asked myself, why is it that God is allowing us to do all this research and to do all this study of the universe today? We're on a level of the instruments and the scientific, the satellites and all this stuff, that we can study this stuff on a level that we've never been able to do this before in history. And I honestly believe, they'll always say, oh, well, they'll say things like, well, we actually found organic compounds on this planet. Yeah, no life. Well, we found organic compounds here. Yeah, no life. Eventually, you would think that people would begin to realize that outside the Earth, the universe is sterile. There's nothing out there as far as life is concerned. And so they never find it. At this point, when you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you would actually think they would stop and think to themselves, well, maybe our hypothesis is flawed, that there isn't evolution and that it's not going on other planets. But the opposite is the case. In fact, at what point do they finally say, maybe there isn't any life other than here, but they can't admit this? Because if they do, then the Bible might be true, and God might exist, and that the earth is special, which points to a special creation. And they don't want to go down that path.